the most expensive mistake on that flight was not turbulence. It was judging the wrong passenger before takeoff. The departure board inside Boston Logan International Airport glowed with the usual stream of destinations as thousands of travelers hurried across polished floors, dragging rolling suitcases and clutching paper coffee cups that had already grown cold. Business travelers answered emails while walking, families searched for their gates, and airport announcements blended into the constant rhythm of engines and conversation. To everyone passing gate C-17, Flight 418 to Dallas looked like another ordinary afternoon departure. The flight was operated by Horizon Airlines, the flagship carrier owned by Horizon Aviation Group. Nobody suspected that within the next several minutes, one decision made in the name of customer service would trigger an investigation that challenged assumptions built over many years. Naomi Murphy adjusted the strap of her dark leather briefcase before stepping into the priority boarding lane. At 42, Naomi was a black woman who carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making important decisions without announcing her authority. Her shoulder-length straight black hair rested neatly against a navy blazer, simple cream blouse, and tailored slacks that reflected practicality rather than luxury. There was nothing flashy about her appearance. No expensive jewelry demanded attention. Nothing about her appearance invited strangers to measure her status, and Naomi believed no passenger should need visible wealth to have a confirmed ticket respected. She simply smiled politely at the gate agent, scanned her boarding pass, thanked him, and continued toward the aircraft with the calm pace of someone who had traveled hundreds of times before. She had spent the previous 3 days attending confidential meetings in Boston that had stretched late into every evening, and all she wanted now was a peaceful flight home to Dallas, where she could finally finish reviewing documents before Monday morning. As Naomi entered the aircraft, the familiar scent of brewed coffee mixed with conditioned cabin air greeted her. She glanced at her boarding pass one more time. First class. Seat 2A. Window. Exactly where she preferred to work during flights. Several passengers were still settling into the cabin, placing bags into overhead bins while flight attendants welcomed everyone aboard with practiced smiles. Standing near the entrance was Paisley Moore, a young white flight attendant whose hair was arranged in 2 neat braids secured behind her shoulders that seemed genuine from a distance. Paisley had earned praise from supervisors for staying organized under pressure and resolving customer complaints quickly. She believed first impressions mattered because premium passengers expected flawless service. Over time, however, she had also developed an unexamined picture of what a first-class traveler was supposed to look like. When a confident white businessman questioned whether a black woman belonged in the cabin, Paisley trusted his assumption before checking the facts displayed on her own device. As Naomi reached row 2, she noticed a middle-aged white businessman already seated across the aisle. His expensive watch caught the cabin lights as he looked up briefly before his expression changed almost imperceptibly. His smile disappeared. His eyes moved from Naomi to her boarding pass and then back again. He leaned toward Paisley and quietly explained that one of his business associates was seated in the main cabin. As a frequent premium customer, he expected the airline to move someone so his associate could sit near him. Then he glanced toward Naomi and added that she did not look like one of the airline's usual first-class travelers. Paisley should have rejected both the request and the assumption immediately. Instead, she looked toward Naomi with an expression that shifted from routine hospitality to quiet uncertainty. Naomi remained unaware for another moment as she placed her briefcase beneath the seat in front of her. She removed a folder filled with neatly organized papers, preparing to spend the next 4 hours reviewing reports instead of watching movies. Before she could sit down, Paisley stepped beside her wearing the same professional smile, although this time it seemed noticeably tighter. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said politely. "May I please see your boarding pass one more time?" Naomi handed it over without hesitation. Paisley examined the screen on her handheld device, looked back at the printed pass, then hesitated longer than expected. She did not ask the businessman to produce his boarding pass again, nor did she verify whether the associate he wanted moved into first class held an eligible ticket. The only passenger whose right to be there was being questioned was Naomi. "There appears to be a seating issue," she explained carefully. Naomi blinked with mild surprise. "A seating issue?" she asked calmly. Paisley nodded again, avoiding direct eye contact for just a fraction of a second before saying words that instantly drew the attention of the nearest passengers. "I am going to need you to step into the aisle for just a moment while we sort something out." "I do not mind waiting if there is an actual problem," Naomi replied in a steady voice that carried neither irritation nor fear. She stepped into the aisle exactly as requested, careful not to inconvenience the other passengers who were still placing bags into overhead compartments. Paisley glanced once more at the boarding pass and then at the seat map displayed on her company device. The information matched perfectly. Seat 2A had been assigned to Naomi. There was no duplicate reservation, no last-minute equipment change, and no visible system alert. At that moment, the legitimate reason for questioning Naomi's seat had ended. Any continued effort to remove her would no longer be based on the reservation system, but on the assumption introduced by the passenger across the aisle. Even so, Paisley did not hand the boarding pass back immediately. Instead, she forced another polite smile and said, "Thank you for your patience. I just need to verify something with another crew member." Naomi simply nodded. "Of course." The businessman across the aisle leaned back comfortably, folding his hands with the relaxed confidence of someone who expected events to unfold in his favor. Although he spoke quietly, his next sentence reached Paisley clearly enough. "I travel with this airline almost every week. I hope this can be handled professionally." Paisley acknowledged him with another brief nod before signaling to a fellow flight attendant near the galley. Within seconds, another crew member approached, and the two employees stepped only a few feet away. They lowered their voices, but several nearby passengers noticed both women repeatedly looking toward Naomi while occasionally glancing at the businessmen. A young college student seated in row 3 removed one earbud, sensing that the conversation was becoming unusual. An older couple exchanged puzzled looks without saying a word. Naomi remained standing beside her assigned seat with remarkable composure, resting one hand lightly on the handle of her briefcase. She had experienced enough business travel to recognize when something was no longer routine, yet she refused to let assumptions replace facts. After nearly a minute, Paisley returned with a carefully rehearsed expression. "Ma'am," she began, "we may need to relocate you to another seat today." Naomi blinked once. "May I ask why?" Paisley hesitated. "We are trying to accommodate another passenger." Naomi remained respectful. "Does my ticket show an incorrect assignment?" "No." "Has the aircraft changed?" "No." "Is my seat unavailable because of a maintenance issue?" Paisley paused again before quietly answering, "Not exactly." The surrounding silence suddenly felt heavier than the constant hum of the aircraft ventilation. The explanation seemed to change every time Naomi asked a simple question, and several nearby passengers had begun noticing the same inconsistency. The college student subtly unlocked his phone beneath the tray table, not to interfere, but because the exchange no longer sounded like a normal seating adjustment. That small movement became the first silent sign that this moment might not end the way anyone expected. Paisley cleared her throat. "We have another seat available in the main cabin," Paisley said. "We would appreciate your cooperation." She offered no operational explanation, no request for a volunteer, and no information about reimbursement for the involuntary downgrade. Naomi looked directly at her. Her expression calm but thoughtful. "I purchased this seat several weeks ago. If there has been an operational change, I completely understand. I would simply appreciate knowing the specific reason." Paisley searched for an answer that sounded both professional and convincing, but none arrived. The businessman shifted impatiently before speaking loud enough for several rows to hear. "Sometimes flexibility makes everything easier." Naomi briefly turned toward him, offering nothing more than a polite glance before returning her attention to Paisley. "I am asking the airline, not another passenger." The words were delivered so gently that nobody could accuse her of being confrontational, yet the distinction landed with unmistakable clarity. Paisley felt the eyes of nearby travelers settling on her. Company policy emphasized clear communication with customers, but the explanation she had been relying upon no longer sounded complete, even to herself. She glanced once more at the handheld device, then quietly excused herself and walked toward the forward galley, where she reached for the interphone instead of returning to Naomi immediately, and as her finger hovered over the call button, the screen displayed a reminder that no premium passenger could be involuntarily downgraded without a documented operational reason and supervisory approval. Paisley read the first line, then locked the screen before finishing the message. Paisley stared at the incoming operational message for only a second before locking the screen and slipping the device closer to her side. The message was directly related to the decision she was about to make, but Paisley convinced herself that satisfying the frequent traveler and completing boarding quickly mattered more than reading the full policy reminder. She took a slow breath, straightened her uniform, and returned toward row 2 wearing the same professional expression she had practiced through years of customer service. Naomi remained exactly where she had been asked to stand. She had not complained to another passenger, had not raised her voice, and had not demanded to speak with a supervisor. Instead, she simply waited with remarkable patience, her briefcase resting neatly beside her leg as if she still believed a reasonable explanation would eventually arrive. Paisley stopped in front of her once again. "Thank you for waiting, ma'am," she said carefully. "At this time, we are asking that you temporarily move to another seat so we can finish boarding on schedule." Naomi looked at her with quiet curiosity rather than frustration. "Is this a temporary change or a permanent reassignment?" Paisley hesitated. "At the moment, I cannot guarantee that your original seat will remain available." Naomi nodded thoughtfully. "May I ask whether another passenger has been assigned to seat 2 Alpha?" Paisley remained silent for a moment that felt much longer than it actually was. "No," she finally admitted. "Then I am trying to understand why I am being asked to leave a seat that belongs to me." The question was delivered without accusation. It was calm, logical, and impossible to dismiss. Nearby conversations gradually faded as more passengers realized the discussion was continuing without a clear answer. The businessman across the aisle shifted impatiently in his seat before speaking again. "This is taking far longer than necessary." Paisley glanced toward him, then back toward Naomi. The pressure of keeping boarding on time mixed with the expectation of satisfying a frequent traveler who claimed to spend thousands of dollars with the airline every month. Training had taught her to resolve conflict quickly. Experience had taught her that influential customers often expected special treatment. In that moment, those two lessons collided in a way she had never anticipated. Halfway down the cabin, the college student quietly angled his phone a little higher, recording nothing dramatic, only a conversation that seemed increasingly unusual because of how polite everyone remained despite the growing tension. An elderly woman seated behind Naomi leaned slightly toward her husband and whispered, "She has done nothing wrong." He answered only with a small nod. Paisley tried once more. "Ma'am, I assure you we are only trying to provide the best experience for everyone on board." Naomi responded with the same measured tone. "The best experience should begin with honoring a confirmed reservation unless there is a legitimate operational reason not to. If there is such a reason, I will gladly cooperate. I simply need to understand it." Paisley realized she still did not have an explanation that matched the facts displayed on her own device. The seat assignment remained valid. There was no equipment issue. No maintenance restriction. No scheduling conflict. Every official record supported Naomi's position. Before Paisley could respond again, Naomi quietly reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and removed her phone. She did not make a dramatic announcement or threaten anyone. She opened a secure transition application that had been issued to her during the confidential leadership process. Naomi sent a concise message to the board liaison responsible for her travel, confirmed first-class passenger being asked to downgrade without operational cause. Please notify local operations and preserve the boarding record. She reviewed it once, pressed send, and returned the phone to her pocket. No one nearby knew who had received it or why the message carried executive priority. Paisley certainly did not ask. She interpreted the action as nothing more than a passenger informing family about a delayed departure. Less than 30 seconds later, inside a secure executive conference room at the company's Los Angeles headquarters, a silent notification appeared on several encrypted devices. The board liaison immediately contacted the airline's Boston regional leadership team, whose offices were located inside the Logan Airport operations complex. The message Naomi had sent traveled far beyond the walls of the aircraft, but inside the cabin nothing appeared to change. Flight attendants continued helping passengers store luggage, the overhead bins clicked shut one after another, and the familiar safety announcements were only minutes away. Paisley believed the uncomfortable conversation was finally approaching its conclusion. She offered another practiced smile and gently motioned toward the main cabin. "Ma'am, if you would please come with me, we will make sure you are comfortable." Naomi looked at her for a brief moment before calmly answering, "I appreciate your concern, but I would prefer to remain beside the seat listed on my boarding pass until someone can explain why I am being asked to leave it." Her voice remained soft enough that no one could accuse her of creating a disturbance. That calmness somehow made the silence around them even heavier. Paisley felt every passing second becoming more difficult. The businessman across the aisle checked his expensive watch with obvious impatience before speaking again. Some people simply do not understand that flexibility keeps things moving. Naomi acknowledged the comment only with a brief glance before returning her attention to Paisley. "I have been flexible," she replied politely. "I have waited. I have listened. I have asked reasonable questions. I am still waiting for one clear answer." Paisley searched for words that would satisfy both company policy and the increasingly uncomfortable situation unfolding around her, but neither seemed possible anymore. Just then, the aircraft captain stepped briefly into the forward cabin after completing paperwork in the cockpit. He immediately sensed the unusual atmosphere. "Is everything all right up here?" he asked. Paisley answered before anyone else could speak. "Just a seating matter, Captain. We are resolving it." The captain asked whether Naomi's boarding pass and seat assignment had been verified. Paisley replied that a supervisor was reviewing the matter and assured him that no safety concern existed. Believing it remained a customer service issue under active review, he returned to the flight deck to continue pre-departure procedures. The moment passed quickly, yet the college student in row 3 quietly noticed something Paisley had missed. The handheld company device attached to her belt vibrated again. This time the notification banner remained visible for just an instant before disappearing. Paisley glanced down, frowned almost imperceptibly, then dismissed the alert without opening it. She assumed it was another routine operational message arriving from headquarters. What she did not know was that the notification had already been marked as urgent. Thousands of miles away, inside the executive conference room, the confidential meeting had completely stopped. A senior legal advisor pushed back his chair while another executive enlarged a secure message displayed across a conference screen. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, one board member looked around the table and quietly asked, "Has anyone informed airport operations yet?" Another executive answered immediately. "They are already being contacted." Back on board the aircraft, boarding continued, although much more slowly than scheduled. Several passengers who had witnessed the exchange remained unusually quiet. An elderly veteran sitting near the bulkhead folded his newspaper and watched without saying a word. A young mother gently distracted her daughter with a coloring book while occasionally glancing toward the front of the cabin. Nobody shouted. Nobody argued. Yet the emotional weight continued growing because every additional minute reinforced the same unanswered question. Why was a passenger with a valid first-class ticket still standing in the aisle? Paisley finally took a measured breath. "Ma'am, I am going to request assistance from the gate supervisor." Naomi offered a courteous smile. "Thank you. That seems appropriate." Paisley pressed the call button for ground support, fully expecting an ordinary supervisor to board the aircraft and settle the disagreement within moments. Instead, less than 60 seconds later, the gate agent answered through the interphone with a voice that sounded unusually tense before saying only one sentence. "Do not close the aircraft door. Executive operations is on the way." Paisley slowly lowered the interphone, uncertain whether she had heard the message correctly. Executive operations almost never became involved in a routine boarding issue, especially before an aircraft had even pushed back from the gate. She glanced toward the cockpit, wondering whether to notify the captain immediately, then decided to wait for the arriving supervisor. Across the aisle, the businessman appeared only mildly annoyed by the delay. He crossed one leg over the other and sighed loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I hope someone gets this flight moving," he muttered. Naomi remained standing beside seat 2A with the same composed expression she had maintained from the beginning. She neither celebrated the unexpected development nor appeared concerned by it. She simply folded her hands loosely in front of her briefcase and waited. That quiet confidence unsettled Paisley more than any argument could have. Less than 3 minutes later, the aircraft door reopened. Instead of a single gate supervisor, 2 airport operations managers stepped onto the aircraft together. Their expressions were noticeably more serious than anyone expected. The lead manager immediately approached Paisley and asked in a low voice, "Is the passenger still here?" Paisley nodded. "Yes. We have been trying to resolve a seating concern." The manager glanced toward Naomi for only a brief moment before asking another question. "Has the aircraft door been closed?" "No, good." Without offering further explanation, he stepped aside and checked his phone. Paisley watched him receive another message. His posture changed almost instantly. He looked toward his colleague and quietly said, "They are closer than expected." Those words meant nothing to the passengers, yet they caused both airport managers to become noticeably more formal. Nearby conversations faded once again as people sensed something unusual unfolding. The college student discreetly lowered his phone for a moment, realizing the situation had clearly expanded beyond a disagreement over a first-class seat. Even the businessman stopped checking his watch. He looked toward the open aircraft door with growing curiosity. Naomi noticed every reaction around her but remained completely still. She had spent enough years leading difficult negotiations to understand that silence often revealed more than hurried explanations. Paisley finally gathered the courage to ask, "May I know who is coming?" The lead manager hesitated before answering carefully. Senior leadership requested that nobody make additional seating changes until they arrive. Paisley frowned. "Senior leadership?" The manager simply nodded without elaborating. A subtle ripple of confusion spread through the front cabin. Flight attendants exchanged uncertain glances while the captain stepped out of the cockpit once again after noticing that boarding had completely stopped. "Can someone tell me what is happening?" he asked calmly. The operations manager answered respectfully. "Captain, we have been instructed to hold departure temporarily. Executive Operations has assumed responsibility for this matter." The captain looked surprised but remained professional. "Do we have an estimated delay?" "Only a few minutes." The captain accepted the explanation, although his expression made it clear that such instructions were highly unusual. He returned to the cockpit to coordinate the revised departure time with airline dispatch and ground operations. Paisley looked back toward Naomi, expecting to see relief or satisfaction. Instead, Naomi simply smiled politely and thanked one of the nearby flight attendants who had quietly offered her a bottle of water. Her composure stood in sharp contrast to the growing uncertainty surrounding everyone else. Then another notification sounded from the operations manager's phone. He read the message, immediately straightened his jacket, and turned toward the aircraft entrance. The Boston Regional Leadership Team had been meeting in an airport conference suite less than 5 minutes from Gate C-17, preparing for the confidential announcement scheduled later that afternoon. Outside the open door, several individuals in dark business attire were already walking briskly down the jet bridge, and the moment the lead manager recognized the person at the front of the group, the color slowly disappeared from his face. The group entering the aircraft moved with quiet purpose rather than urgency. There were no flashing badges, no raised voices, and no dramatic announcements. The woman leading them wore a dark business suit with an airport security credential clipped neatly to her jacket. Behind her walked 2 Boston-based regional executives who had already been at Logan Airport for leadership transition preparations, followed by the regional director of airport operations and a local representative from the company's legal department. The operations manager who had been waiting at the aircraft door immediately stepped aside. "They are here," he said softly. Paisley felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had expected perhaps a station supervisor or a customer service manager. She had never imagined this many senior officials would appear before departure. The lead executive thanked the captain for delaying the flight and quietly asked that boarding remain paused for only a few more minutes. The captain agreed without objection, recognizing that whatever had happened had moved well beyond normal cabin operations. Passengers watched in complete silence as the group walked directly toward the front of the first-class cabin. The businessman who had earlier complained straightened his jacket, clearly assuming the executives had arrived to resolve the inconvenience in his favor. He even offered a courteous smile as they approached. To his surprise, not one of them acknowledged him. Instead, every member of the group stopped beside Naomi. For a brief second, nobody spoke. Then the senior executive extended both hands with genuine respect. "Ms. Murphy," he said calmly, "thank you for waiting. We sincerely apologize for the delay." Paisley felt the air leave her lungs. The airport managers immediately lowered their voices and stepped back, allowing the executive to continue. Naomi returned the handshake politely. "Good afternoon," she replied with the same quiet composure she had displayed from the moment she boarded the aircraft. "I appreciate your coming." The executive nodded once. "We came as quickly as possible." Around the cabin, confused expressions spread from one passenger to another. The businessman looked from Naomi to the executives, struggling to understand why they were greeting her with such visible respect. Even the college student slowly lowered his phone, realizing this moment had become something far more significant than a customer complaint. Paisley remained frozen beside the aisle. Every assumption she had made during boarding suddenly felt uncertain. She replayed each conversation in her mind, searching for something she might have overlooked. Halfway through the exchange, the legal representative quietly handed the executive a sealed folder. He reviewed a single page before looking back at Naomi. "Everything has been confirmed," he said. Naomi gave a small nod but did not open the folder. "Thank you," she answered. "For now, I would simply like the boarding process to remain respectful for everyone involved." The executive agreed immediately. There was no trace of anger in Naomi's voice, no demand for immediate consequences, only a measured request that every passenger continue to be treated professionally. That response seemed to surprise even the executives accompanying him. Paisley finally gathered enough courage to step forward. "Excuse me," she said carefully. "May I ask if I have missed something?" The executive turned toward her with a calm but serious expression. "At the appropriate time, everyone will receive the information they need." His answer was polite, yet unmistakably firm. Paisley nodded silently, realizing there would be no immediate explanation. Then another secure message arrived on the executive's phone. He read it once before looking directly at Naomi. "The public announcement has just been released," he said quietly. "As of this moment, everyone in the company has officially been notified." Naomi closed her eyes for the briefest instant, took a slow breath, and reopened them with the same calm expression. Across the cabin, several airline employees' company devices began vibrating almost simultaneously with the newly issued corporate announcement, and Paisley instinctively reached for hers without realizing that the headline waiting on the screen was about to change everything she believed she knew about the passenger standing only a few feet away. Paisley's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as she unlocked her company device. The notification displayed the airline's official corporate seal, marked with the highest internal priority. Employees across the company were receiving the same announcement at exactly the same moment. She opened it, expecting another operational update. Instead, the headline immediately caught her attention. Effective at 3 p.m. Central Time, following the completion of the previously approved acquisition and leadership transition, board-designated incoming executive Naomi Murphy has officially assumed the role of Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Aviation Group. Naomi had been serving under a strict confidentiality agreement during the transition, which explained both her access to the secure executive channel and why frontline employees had not yet been told who she was. Paisley read the sentence twice before the meaning truly settled in. Her eyes slowly lifted from the screen toward the woman she had repeatedly asked to surrender a seat that had rightfully belonged to her all along. Around the cabin, other airline employees who carried company devices were experiencing the same realization. The airport operations manager quietly lowered his phone. One of the executives folded the announcement back into his jacket as though it required no further confirmation. It was already official. The businessman across the aisle frowned with visible confusion. He had expected the executives to acknowledge him as a valued traveler. Instead, every conversation, every decision, and every ounce of attention centered on the woman he had quietly expected to disappear into the main cabin only minutes earlier. Naomi noticed the expressions around her but remained remarkably composed. She did not announce her title. She did not remind anyone of what had happened. She simply looked toward the captain, who had returned from the cockpit after hearing that corporate leadership had arrived. The captain extended his hand respectfully. "Ms. Murphy, welcome aboard," he said. "I regret that your boarding experience did not reflect the standards we expect." Naomi accepted the handshake with a warm but measured smile. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your professionalism." Her response carried no trace of triumph. That calmness somehow made the moment even more powerful. Halfway through the conversation, the regional executive turned toward the gathered managers. "Please ensure that every document connected to this boarding process is preserved," he instructed. "That includes boarding records, seating assignments, gate communications, and all relevant operational logs." Paisley heard every word. Preserve. Document. Review. Those were not instructions given for a routine customer complaint. Those were the first steps of a formal corporate investigation. A quiet realization settled over the cabin. Whatever happened next would not depend upon assumptions or emotions. It would depend upon facts. Naomi spoke again, her voice remaining steady. "I would like every employee involved to have the opportunity to explain what happened before any conclusions are reached." Several executives exchanged surprised glances. One legal advisor nodded appreciatively while making a note inside the folder. Naomi had just requested fairness not only for herself, but also for the very employees whose decisions had placed her in this situation. Paisley lowered her eyes for a moment. The kindness in that request felt heavier than anger ever could have. The businessman shifted uncomfortably in his seat before quietly clearing his throat. "Perhaps this has all been a misunderstanding," he offered. No one responded immediately. His earlier confidence had disappeared, replaced by careful uncertainty. Even he seemed to recognize that every conversation during boarding could soon become part of an official review. Naomi turned toward him briefly, offering nothing more than a polite nod before returning her attention to the executives. She refused to embarrass anyone publicly. The regional executive then addressed the captain. "Please continue preparing for departure. We will not delay the remaining passengers any longer." It seemed the situation was finally calming. Paisley allowed herself a cautious breath, hoping the worst might already be over. Then the legal representative stepped beside the executive and showed him a newly received confidential memorandum on a secured tablet. He opened it, read only the first page, and his composed expression immediately became noticeably more serious before he looked directly at Naomi and said, "There is one additional matter that you need to see before this aircraft leaves the gate." The legal representative held the tablet carefully, waiting until the surrounding conversations had faded before turning the screen toward Naomi. She read silently for several seconds, her expression remaining composed despite the significance of what appeared before her. The confidential report had not been created in response to the aircraft incident. It was an existing due diligence summary prepared during the acquisition review. When Naomi's alert was received, the Corporate Ethics Office cross-referenced the incident with unresolved passenger complaints already contained in that report. Naomi looked up and asked only one question. "Has anyone reached a conclusion?" The attorney immediately shook his head. "No, ma'am. We have only instructed every department to preserve evidence. No disciplinary decisions have been made." Naomi nodded with quiet approval. "Good. Facts first. Conclusions later." Those 4 words were heard by Paisley, the captain, the airport managers, and even several passengers seated nearby. They carried far more weight than anyone expected because they removed both revenge and emotion from the process before either could influence the outcome. Paisley slowly exhaled, realizing that the investigation would not begin with accusations but with documentation. For the first time since boarding had started, she understood that every decision she had made would be examined exactly as it happened, not as anyone later remembered it. The regional executive turned toward the operations manager. Please secure the gate surveillance footage beginning 30 minutes before boarding. Preserve all boarding scanner records, internal messaging, seating assignments, and crew communications. Already in progress, the manager answered. Very good. Also request written statements from everyone directly involved before the end of their shifts. Paisley listened carefully. Nothing sounded theatrical. Nothing sounded rushed. Every instruction followed standard corporate compliance procedures, making the situation feel even more serious. Halfway through the discussion, the college student who had quietly recorded portions of the conversation raised his hand politely. Excuse me, he said. I recorded part of what happened because I thought it looked unusual. If it helps your investigation, I am willing to provide it. The attorney thanked him immediately. We appreciate your willingness to cooperate. If needed, our office will contact you through the information you voluntarily provide. Naomi looked toward the student and offered a grateful smile. Thank you for acting respectfully. The young man simply nodded, suddenly realizing he had witnessed something that would likely be discussed throughout the company for years. Across the aisle, the businessman shifted uneasily in his seat. His earlier confidence had completely disappeared. He cleared his throat before quietly addressing the executive. I would like to clarify that I never intended for anyone to be treated unfairly. The executive acknowledged the statement professionally. You will also have an opportunity to provide your account. There was no criticism in his voice, only procedure. Naomi remained silent. She neither challenged the man's explanation nor encouraged it. Her restraint spoke more loudly than any public response could have. The captain then announced that departure preparations would resume as soon as the remaining administrative matters were completed. Flight attendants calmly continued assisting passengers while maintaining professional composure. Paisley returned to the forward galley, no longer focused on appearances or schedules. Instead, she quietly replayed every conversation in her mind, recognizing details she had overlooked in the pressure to satisfy assumptions rather than verified information. A few moments later, the regional executive approached Naomi once more. There is one recommendation from corporate ethics, he said. They would like the investigation expanded beyond this flight. Naomi looked at him thoughtfully. On what basis? He opened another document and answered carefully. Preliminary records show several unresolved complaints from black passengers and other passengers of color who reported being questioned, reseated, or asked to verify premium cabin eligibility after their reservations had already been confirmed. If that pattern is confirmed, this will no longer be reviewed as a single boarding incident. It will become a company-wide culture assessment. For the first time since boarding began, even the senior executives fell completely silent, because everyone understood that the story unfolding inside this aircraft might only be the beginning. The cabin slowly returned to motion, but it did not return to the atmosphere that had existed before Naomi stepped aboard. Every passenger seemed to understand that they had witnessed something far larger than a disagreement over a seat assignment. The boarding door finally closed, the captain received clearance to continue departure preparations, and the aircraft pushed back from the gates several minutes behind schedule. Inside the first-class cabin, the usual conversations remained noticeably quieter. Paisley completed her remaining responsibilities with careful professionalism. She no longer rushed through each interaction. She paused before speaking, verified every passenger's request, and checked every boarding record twice. It was a small behavioral change, not proof that she had already overcome the bias behind her decision. Paisley understood that genuine improvement would require the formal review, further training, and a willingness to examine patterns she had previously failed to recognize. Shortly before takeoff, she approached Naomi one final time. There was no audience gathered around them now, no executives watching, and no passengers waiting for another dramatic moment. Paisley simply stopped beside seat 2A and spoke honestly. Ms. Murphy, I cannot change what happened today. I can only tell you that I am truly sorry for the way I handled it. Naomi looked up from the folder resting on her lap and met Paisley's eyes without hesitation. Thank you for saying that, she replied gently. Accountability always begins with honesty. Paisley nodded quietly. I understand that now. Naomi offered a warm smile before adding, Please do not allow today to become only your worst memory. Let it become your most important lesson. Paisley felt some of the weight she had carried since boarding began to ease, not because the situation had disappeared, but because she had finally accepted responsibility instead of searching for excuses. Across the aisle, the businessman remained unusually quiet throughout the taxi to the runway. Before the safety demonstration concluded, he leaned slightly toward Naomi. "I owe you an apology as well," he said respectfully. "I made assumptions that I should not have made." Naomi acknowledged him with the same grace she had shown everyone else. "Thank you. I hope we both leave today having learned something valuable." There was no argument, no humiliation, and no attempt to prolong the moment. Sometimes the strongest form of justice arrived without raising a single voice. Several weeks later, the airline publicly announced a comprehensive review of customer service policies, employee training, and reporting procedures throughout the company. The review included expanded education on racial profiling and unconscious bias, clearer documentation standards, mandatory supervisory approval for involuntary premium cabin downgrades, and stronger safeguards requiring seating decisions to be supported by verified operational facts. Individual personnel matters remained confidential, consistent with company policy, but employees across the organization understood that expectations had permanently changed. The incident aboard Flight 418 became part of future leadership training, not because of the titles involved, but because it demonstrated how quickly ordinary decisions could affect trust. Naomi never requested public recognition for what had happened. She believed lasting change rarely began with public embarrassment. It began when people chose to examine themselves with the same honesty they expected from others. Months later, employees still spoke about the day the new chief executive officer quietly boarded a flight without announcing who she was. Many remembered the surprise. Others remembered the investigation. But those who understood the story best remembered something simpler. She never demanded respect because of her position. She expected respect because every passenger deserved it before anyone knew their title. Closing reflection. Perhaps the most meaningful moments in life are the ones that reveal character before they reveal identity. Titles, achievements, and influence can change how people respond, but kindness has always had the ability to stand on its own. This story quietly reminds us that every brief interaction carries the possibility of becoming something far more important than we first imagine. Sometimes a single conversation becomes a mirror, reflecting habits we never noticed in ourselves. There are moments when slowing down, asking one more question, or offering one more measure of patience can completely change the direction of someone's day. Respect given freely often leaves a deeper mark than respect offered only after status becomes visible. If this story stayed with you, we would love to hear your perspective. What part of this journey resonated with you the most, and if you had been standing in that cabin, how do you think you would have responded to the situation?